Hello, honey. I just got a call from Booktown Search and Rescue, and I found a flotation device that I threw to Mom when she fell overboard.
It just doesn't add up why she was swimming away from the boat. I have known past issues between them have not been good, so it's just weird that this is happening now.
Before Lynette Hooker disappeared, she had already been trying to leave. She had sent some messages quietly, initiated conversations that didn't go far, and made plans that never fully happened. But now, she is gone, while her husband is saying it was an accident, a fall, an unfortunate moment, and a bad condition. But now, new details are starting to surface. Messages, family accounts, and a version of their relationship that looks very different from the one seen on the surface. Because in the weeks leading up to that night, there were signs, and some of them sound familiar. So the question now is, not just what happened on that boat, but whether something like this had already been building long before it happened. We monitor true crime stories that you shouldn't miss, bringing you the main parts other people may have missed. You should subscribe now so you never miss anything. This is an update on the Lynette Hooker case. In part 1, we followed the night she disappeared during a short boat ride in the Bahamas and everything that followed. But since then, more information has come forward from her family, from past records, and from Lynette herself. Details that begin to paint a clearer picture of her life before that night and raise new questions about the person who was with her. Because this case may not just be about a single moment in the water. It may be about everything that led up to it. So, before investigators stepped in and any official questions were asked, someone else had already started to question what happened. Lynette Hooker's daughter. The moment came through a phone call she had with Brian after everything had already unfolded, and the message was simple. There had been an accident. Lynette had fallen overboard. This had happened quickly, and there was nothing he could do. That was the explanation, right? But for her, something didn't land, not immediately, not in a way she could clearly explain at first. It wasn't just the words, it was how they were delivered. He sounded calm, measured, and controlled, the kind of tone that didn't match what she expected to hear. Because this wasn't a minor incident. This was someone disappearing into open water at night, a real human, and yet the urgency wasn't there. There was no sense of panic carrying through the conversation, no rush of fragmented details, just a version of events presented as if it had already been settled. And then there was something else, the timing. By the time that call came in, her mother had already been missing for hours, not just a short delay, nearly a full day, which meant that everything, the fall, the night on the water, the search that never happened in those first critical hours, had already passed before anyone in the family even knew. That wasn't something she could ignore, because when someone goes missing at sea, timing is everything. Those first moments matter. The first search, the first call for help, the first chance to find someone while it's still possible. And in this case, that window was already gone. And as more details began to come through in the following days, his story didn't become clearer. It became harder to follow. Certain parts stayed vague. Other parts seemed to shift slightly depending on how they were explained. There was nothing dramatic in his story, or anything that could be pointed to as a clear contradiction. But there was enough to create doubt, the kind of doubt that builds quietly, the kind that doesn't come from one major issue, but from several smaller ones that don't quite fit together. And for someone who knew Lynette, who understood how she lived, how she moved, how familiar she was with that environment, his explanation raised more questions than answers. So, eventually, she spoke publicly. She wasn't trying to accuse him or point fingers with certainty, but she spoke with something else, concern. Her words were careful, measured in the same way the original explanation had been. She didn't claim to know what happened, but she made one thing clear. She didn't fully believe the story she had been given. And that's important in this story.
Have known past issues between them have not been good, so it's just weird that this is happening now.
Because up until that point, there had only been one version of that night. Now, we have doubts, coming from someone closest to the person who had disappeared, and once that doubt is introduced, we can't just let it go away. It stays there, quietly shaping every detail that follows. I am sure you have the same doubt too, right or no? Now our question will be, what made her question the story so quickly, before most of the details were even known? Now to the update. At some point after that first call, there was another message, a voicemail, left by Brian. By then, Lynette was already missing. The situation hadn't improved. There had been no update, no sign of her. And yet, the tone of the message didn't reflect that.
Hello, honey. I just got a call from Booktown Search and Rescue, and I found a flotation device that I threw to Mom when she fell overboard.
You get this rushed kind of tone. There was no break in his voice, no sense that something had just gone terribly wrong. Instead, it sounded composed, carefully delivered, like someone explaining a situation rather than reacting to it. He went over what had happened, described the fall, the water, how quickly everything unfolded. But the focus stayed on the explanation, not the emotion, not the urgency of someone who had just lost sight of their wife in open water. There were no frantic questions, no repeated attempts to reach out, no sense of escalation. And that behavior stood out a lot for me, because in situations like this, where someone disappears suddenly without warning, the response is usually immediate, uncontrolled, unstructured. People don't pause to organize their thoughts. They don't deliver clean summaries. People react. But this message didn't feel like a reaction. It felt processed, as if the event had already been settled in his mind by the time he spoke about it. And then there was something else. What wasn't said. There was no clear urgency about searching, no detail about immediate next steps, no sense that time was still critical at that moment, just a version of what had already happened. And for Lynette's daughter, that added to what she was already feeling. Because now, it wasn't just the delay or the gaps in his story. It was the way the situation was being communicated, calmly, directly, without the kind of instability you might expect. And that created a different kind of question, not just about the night itself, but about how it was being presented afterward. Because when something happens suddenly, and the response doesn't match the moment, it leaves space for doubt in everyone's mind. Not loud doubt, not immediate accusations, but something quieter, something that builds. Especially when it comes from someone who is trying to understand what happened, while feeling that something isn't quite right. So the question here is that, if this had just happened, why didn't the message reflect that urgency? Now, the issue is that, from the outside, their life looked simple. A couple who had been together for decades, choosing to leave everything behind for a different kind of life. Lynette and Brian had been married for years, long enough to build a shared history, a routine, a sense of stability. And at some point, they made a decision that would change everything. They sold their home. They let go of the structure they had built on land and moved onto a sailboat. From the outside, this looked like freedom, a life of movement, travel, waking up in different places. Photos from that time reflected. The boat anchored in clear water, open skies, quiet surroundings. It's the kind of life many people imagine wanting. But living that way comes with something else. There's no distance, no separate spaces, no easy way to step away from tension. Everything happens in the same place. Every conversation, every disagreement. And over time, that kind of closeness can start to feel different. According to people close to Lynette, The relationship wasn't as calm as it appeared. There were arguments, not isolated ones, but repeated conflict, tension that didn't stay hidden forever. Some of it centered around the lifestyle itself, the decision to live on the boat, the financial changes that came with it, what had been given up to make it possible. But we all know that once such a choice is made, there isn't an easy way back, and that can add pressure, the kind that builds quietly, not necessarily visible from the outside, but present in the day-to-day reality of living it. Over time, the relationship began to look less like a shared adventure, and more like something harder to manage, still intact, still functioning, but no longer simple. And for those watching from a distance, it became clear from present informations that what appeared stable on the surface was carrying more underneath. My question here is, how serious did it become? Up to this point, most of what's been said about Lynette's life has come from other people, family, observers, those trying to piece things together after the fact. But then, something more direct surfaced. Messages sent by Lynette herself, not written for the public, not meant to explain anything after the fact. Just private conversations shared with people she trusted. And in those messages, the tone is different from the life seen on the surface. There's no sense of adventure in them, no excitement about the lifestyle, no reflection of the calm, steady image that appeared from the outside. Instead, what comes through is frustration, not the sudden kind, and obviously not tied to one specific moment, but something that had been building over time. In some of those messages, she talks about wanting to leave, not casually, but in a way that suggests it had already been considered more than once. There are references to how long things had felt this way, to the idea that the relationship hadn't been working for far longer than anyone outside might have realized. And then, there are the sacrifices. The things she had given up. Her home, her stability, the life she had before, all of it tied to a decision that couldn't easily be undone. Because once everything is sold, once your life is placed into a single shared space, leaving becomes more complicated than just walking away. And that reality shows up in the way she writes. There was a deep frustration and a kind of exhaustion. The sense of being stuck between wanting something different and not having a clear way to get there. These weren't messages written during a single bad day. They reflect something longer, a pattern, a state of mind that had already been forming well before that night on the water. And for those reading them later, after she had already disappeared, they didn't feel like random complaints. They felt like context, a glimpse into what her life actually looked like when no one else was watching. Now my question here is this: if she was already trying to leave, what stopped? So, we've analyzed the messages, and it already suggested something important. That Lynette wasn't just unhappy, she was trying to change her situation, and at different points, she had already taken steps to leave. This wasn't a single decision made in frustration. It has happened more than once. Moments where she separated herself from Brian, where she stepped away from the relationship, at least temporarily. But each time, she came back, but not without reason. There were factors pulling her in both directions. Some of them are practical. There was the finances for one. Their lives had become closely tied together, especially after selling their home. Resources weren't separate anymore. Everything was shared, and that changes what leaving actually means. It's no longer just about distance. It's about rebuilding everything from the ground up. And then there was the lifestyle itself. Living on a sailboat isn't like living in a house. There are no separate rooms to retreat into, no nearby support system, no easy way to physically create space. You're either there or you're not, which makes any kind of separation more complicated, because leaving doesn't just mean walking out the door. It means finding somewhere else to go, figuring out how to get there, and doing it without the structure most people rely on. That kind of setup creates a different kind of pressure, one that isn't always visible, but is always present. So when Lynette left, it wasn't simple. And when she returned, it didn't necessarily mean things had been resolved. It just meant the situation continued, a cycle that had already formed. Leave, return, try again. And each time that cycle repeats, it becomes harder to break. Because the longer it goes on, the more complicated everything becomes, and the fewer clear exits remain. For me, I am particularly curious as to what she was dealing with on a daily basis since she couldn't leave. Now, up to this point, the story has been built on patterns, arguments, tension, attempts to leave. But at some stage, those patterns moved beyond words. There were reports of physical confrontations between Brian and Lynette, not isolated disagreements, but moments where conflict became physical. According to accounts shared by family, some of those incidents escalated quickly. What began as arguments didn't always stay that way. There are allegations that during at least one of those confrontations, Brian placed his hands around Lynette's neck. Not as a passing claim, but as something serious enough to be remembered and repeated later. In situations like that, we know how fast things like this can escalate, especially when the line between argument and danger is no longer unclear. And for those close to Lynette, these weren't stories heard from a distance. Some of the incidents were witnessed, others were described directly by Lynette herself, which gave them a different kind of weight. Because now, it wasn't just tension being observed, it was behavior being reported. At one point, law enforcement became involved, a response triggered not by speculation, but by what had already taken place. Details from those encounters were documented, not necessarily leading to long-term separation, but adding another layer to what was already building over time. And that's where the pattern becomes harder to ignore, because it's no longer just about disagreement, it's about escalation. A shift from verbal conflict to something more physical. And once that shift happens, it changes how everything is before it is understood. It also changes how everything after it is viewed, especially when looking back from a moment like this. If those incidents had already happened, how far had things escalated? As more people began speaking about Lynette and Brian's relationship, some details didn't come up right away. Not because they weren't important, but because at the time they happened, they didn't seem like something that would matter later. They sounded like something else, an argument, a moment of anger, words said in frustration, the kind of thing people say and then move past. But after Lynette disappeared, those same words started to sound different. According to family accounts, there had been a moment during an earlier argument where Brian made a statement, a specific one, not vague, not general. He allegedly said he would throw her overboard. At the time, it wasn't taken literally. There was no immediate follow-up, no assumption that it would ever become real. It was understood as anger, a line said in the middle of conflict, and left there. But now, looking back from what happened in the Bahamas, the setting is the same, the environment is the same, and the outcome being described matches that earlier statement in a way that's hard to ignore. Because out of everything someone could say in an argument, that detail stands out. Not because of how it sounded then, but because of how it sounds now, after the fact. And that's where things begin to shift again, because it's no longer just about behavior or tension or conflict. Now, there's a statement made before the event that appears to mirror what is being described afterward. Now, this may not be a confirmation or a conclusion, but this is a connection that wasn't there before. And once something like that is introduced, we don't let it slide. It stays in the background, attached to everything that follows. So, my question now will be this. If that statement had been made before, was it just anger or something more? By this point, several layers of the relationship had already started to come into view. The arguments, the attempts to leave, the incidents that went further than words. But there was another factor running underneath all of it, less visible, but constant. Money. Not in the sense of sudden financial trouble, but in how their lives had been structured. Because when Lynette and Brian made the decision to leave their life on land, It didn't just change where they lived, it changed how everything was connected. They sold their home, turned what had once been separate stability into something shared. One space, one lifestyle, one set of resources tied directly to both of them. And we know once this kind of thing happens, it's not easy to undo. Because now, everything becomes linked. Where you live, how you move, what options you have. And in a setup like that, control doesn't always show up clearly. It doesn't always look like restriction. Sometimes, it's just the reality of the situation. Leaving means starting over, from a position where everything is already tied together, which raises a different kind of question. Who had access to what? Who made decisions about how things were used or where they went next? There are indications that Lynette had access to financial resources, but access and control aren't always the same thing, especially in a shared environment where both people depend on the same system to function. And when tension already exists in a relationship, financial pressure can amplify it seriously, not necessarily all at once, but over time, quietly shaping decisions, limiting options, making certain choices harder to act on, particularly when one person is already considering leaving. Because at that point, it's not just about the relationship, it's about everything connected to it, where to go, how to get there, what happens next. And in a situation like theirs, those questions don't have simple answers, which means the pressure doesn't disappear. It stays, built into the structure of the life they were living. So we ask this time, could financial pressure have added to the tension that was already building beneath the surface? As more information began to surface, the investigation didn't stay where it started. It expanded. What was once focused on a single version of events, a fall, a drift, a disappearance, now had additional context. And investigators began revisiting what they already had. Statements were reviewed again, not just Brian's, but now also what had come from Lynette's family. Details that hadn't been part of the original timeline were now being placed alongside it. Messages, accounts of past incidents, descriptions of the relationship, not treated as conclusions, but as pieces, added carefully, compared against what had already been said, because an investigation doesn't move in a straight line. It loops back, re-examines, looks at the same moment again, but with more information than before. And that's where things start to make sense, because once behavioral patterns are introduced, they don't sit separately from the timeline. They get placed into it. The arguments, the attempts to leave, the incidents that escalated, the statement that had been recalled, all of it now exists in the same space as that night. Not replacing the original account, but surrounding it, giving investigators more to work with as they try to understand what fits and what doesn't. Brian at this point has not been charged. Legally, nothing has changed in that sense. But his position in the case hasn't changed either. He remains the central figure, the only person who was there, the one whose account everything still connects back to. And now, that account is being viewed alongside a growing amount of context, more voices, more details, more history. The kind that doesn't close a case, but makes it more complex, because instead of one version of events, there are now multiple layers surrounding it. And the investigation continues, with all of them in play, with all these new details. Do you think his original story still holds? By now, the story has moved far beyond a single night on the water. What started as a brief account, a fall, a drift, a disappearance, has grown into something more layered, more complicated, and still incomplete. Because despite everything that has surfaced, Lynette Hooker is still missing. There has been no recovery, no confirmed location, no definitive account of her final moments. And without that, the story remains open. On one side, there is the explanation that has been there from the beginning. An accident? A sudden fall into the water. Conditions that made it impossible to recover her. A sequence of events that unfolded quickly and couldn't be reversed. It's a version that can exist on its own, but it doesn't exist alone anymore, because now there is another layer surrounding it. A relationship that wasn't as stable as it appeared, messages that suggest she was trying to leave, a pattern of conflict that had already escalated, a statement that now carries a different weight, and a timeline that raised questions from the very beginning. None of these confirm what happened, but they don't disappear either. They sit alongside the original account, changing how it's understood. And that's where the case remains, between two possibilities, one that explains the event as it was described, and one that suggests something else may have been building long before that night. For Lynette's family, that space is difficult to hold, because without answers, there's no clear direction, only questions. Hope in one direction, doubt in another, both existing at the same time. And for now, neither one has been resolved. The investigation remains open. No final conclusion, no closure, just a story that stops without an ending. Now, my final question to you: do you think of this as a tragic accident in the water, or the final moment of something that had been building for years? We monitor true crime stories that you shouldn't miss, bringing you the main parts other people may have missed. You should subscribe now so you never miss anything.